Drivers, start your engines!
Pick the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver, pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger, no sweating working for the man, alright.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about this week in racing and preview next week. Joining me in the studio, I have Richard Youden and Luis Torres. Guys, what's up?
It's all good.
It's been pretty good, pretty intense, but hanging in there.
Oh, so you've been camping?
Not yet.
Intense?
Pretty intense.
Yeah. I know, it's bad pun day, so...
Comedy Central will be picking the show up before we know it.
But it is pretty intense. I don't know. We'll see come May. I'll be sleeping in. Well, we'll see.
All right. We'll see. All right. So anyway, we've got Indycar starting up this week. Formula One in Imola. NASCAR had a race this past week in Martinsville. And where are we off to next week in NASCAR land?
We are heading to Richmond.
Heading to Richmond. That is correct.
Daytime, no less. So we should expect the racing to be quite stellar because usually those day races have been pretty criminally underrated over time, though how good those races are. When it's at nighttime, those are rarely rare now.
Yeah. I mean, Richmond is one of those interesting tracks that it's at times produces really great racing, but it can also produce a total dud, But before we talk about Richmond too much, let's look back at Martinsville. We had yet another weather delay. The nice thing was the race was scheduled Saturday, so it was able to run on Sunday, so it wasn't an entirely empty racetrack, although these days with the limited in-person attendance that we're still seeing, all the racetracks look a little empty compared to what we're seeing here. But it was a typical Martinsville race with a lot of beating and banging, and again, like we've seen, Penske cars very strong. Ryan Blaney looked to have this whole thing under control, but at the end of the day, it's Martin Truex winning at Martinsville again. He won there for the first time with last year or the year before, after not being able to ever win in a short track. So Truex certainly has Martinsville figured out again, or figured out now. But Penske guys are still just a victim of their own mistakes. The pit stops were terrible for Blaney, weren't they, Luis?
It bit him when it mattered most that he got that speeding penalty because it was he and Denny Hamlin battling for the win pretty much nearly the whole entire race. In fact, I think the top four stage finishers in both of them remain the same in place, somewhere within that line. But yeah, it turned out to be another disappointing night, because it ended at night for Team Penske. Yes, they won 2 out of the last 3 races, but that very third one that they lost compared to winning, it goes back to what's been the theme of this season, whether it's pit stops, whether it's a late race incident, or just completely anything that could go wrong has gone wrong for Team Penske. The fortunate thing when we're talking about is they actually have 2 wins, with Blaney being one of them already. So
right, yeah,
it's still discouraging to be,
and Logano being the other. Yeah, but the thing is, if you look at this, if you look at their performance, they could easily have 5 or 6 wins.
Yeah, they would. We would talk about them as the team to beat. Period.
Right, and now most
Gibson Hendrick.
Most teams, 8 races of the season, will be pretty happy with 2 wins and 2 of the guys in their chase. But and I know that Roger Penske and the entire Penske organization set their goals a little higher than that. So these guys have got to be beyond frustrated, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's for sure. It dawned on me that Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski only has that 1 stage win. Some of them don't even have that many stage wins, but they are still able to be strong. The question is, they cannot have these kind of problems in the postseason. So when we go back there in November, I'd imagine if Blaney's in a situation where he has a shot at that championship four, because that's been his Achilles heel the postseason. If he makes it that far, a great run like he had is encouraging, but they got to clean up the pit stop. You cannot have a Chase Elliott moment. You'll have that once in a while, but you cannot have that luck all the time. It's just the nature of the beast when it comes to racing. Pit stops can be an absolute gremlin, and that was the case for Blaney. And for Hamlin, on the other hand, another great run. He's been really strong in the points, but he still does not have that win, and he finished third once more to Martin Truex Jr. And with Truex's case, now he has 2 wins. That is quite significant, because if you look back a year ago, he only got that one Martinsville win in that weeknight race. Now he's back on track, and I think having James Small in his second year, I think they're finally building something where Cole Pern left off to do his own thing, and that one time he did the Indy 500 with Connor Daly.
Right, so now Truex is the first guy to win more than one race this year. He's our first repeat winner after having a different winner in every race, which really shows how competitive the series is this season. Which I've enjoyed watching, and just when you look at the amount of guys who still have the ability, to win, this is going to be a real chase to the championship, if you will. If you don't mind me stealing an older NASCAR thing there, but Truex seems to be more comfortable in his shoes at Joe Gibbs than when he first started there. It took him a little while to make that transition from Furniture Row to being part of that much larger Gibbs organization, but he seems to be just quite comfortable. He seems to drive really smart. He's there when it matters at the end. You don't need to lead the whole race. You just need to be there at the end. So a good job for Truex, because this is a guy who just a couple years ago, the knock on him was that he couldn't win on a short track.
Yeah, now he's got plenty of short tracks, especially in Martinsville, under his belt. And that's the thing about Truex, is that some people have noted that he's probably one of the more cleaner racers out there. He'll try to race you hard in a sense, a fairway. Don't need to use the chrome horn. Like he's dealt with. Sure, he gets rubs people the wrong way when he gets all frustrated, but all drivers do. And then again, it kind of associates the fact that Joe Gibbs drivers are that way, because that's kind of like the norms. Like, Kyle Busch complains about this, or Denny Hamlin, or Truex. He got all that JG yard bug and all that. But that's just how it is sometimes. But for Truex, what I will give him credit, and I think is undeniable for all intents and purposes, he'll run you aggressive, but in a good way. Don't have to use all the fenders or everything, which some people can admire. And that's kind of what happened with Hamlin, because both of them, if you recall a while back, Hamlin and Truex were rubbing fenders, and both were getting mad at one another mid-race. Now they had a battle for the win that favored Martin.
Yeah. And to Denny's credit, I mean, that's his home track. He's won a number of races there at Martinsville. I'll expect a lot out of Denny Hamlin at Martinsville. So, even though he didn't get the win there, he again was there at the end. And Martinsville sometimes can be a battle of survival, with the beating and the banging. But the nice thing about Martinsville is that I've always enjoyed about that particular race is you can still be very competitive with a banged up car, because, the aero is not really important with the lower speeds. And I still remember Harry Gant winning the race in the car that was missing the whole front quarter and being held together with duct tape. But it's a battle of survival, but it's not necessarily a battle of attrition, even with the rule where the what do they call it? The damage clock rule. We still see much of the field running at the finish there at Martinsville. And I've always just really enjoyed that track. The racing there hasn't changed much over the year. Martinsville, as a matter of fact, is the race that got me hooked on NASCAR to begin with. I was a big Formula One IndyCar guy. I'd watched some NASCAR here and there. But, the first time I went to a NASCAR race, it was at Martinsville, and I was like, golly, this place is nuts. This is amazing. So, and it's still there, the oldest track on the circuit. And I really hope it doesn't. Every now and again, I wonder if Martinsville's going to go by the wayside like a North Wilkesboro did, just because it's old and a part of the past. But I think it's just, it's an important part of the past. And I think it's just a very entertaining event.
Yeah. I think those concerns have been gone a long while ago because I know one of NASCAR man and Brock Beard's videos were talking about Martinsville being endangered at one point on being on the chopping block. But fortunately, we didn't get to see that. And I think with that being a night race now, I think it shows that all things are going to be fine with that paperclip circuit. Yeah, I know they got rid of the azaleas and the grass and everything, which I understand is unfortunate because this looks weird on pavement, but at least we still have that track out there, and it's now become quite a unique fixture. Speaking of unique fixtures, before you want to mention something about Rick Ware Racing, because aside from that big wreck, aside from Daniel Suarez throwing the water bottle to William Byron after that big wreck on the backstretch, Cody Ware and James Davison. I was not expecting that to be like the big beef of this whole entire race. Because usually short tracks tempers flare, but I was not expecting it to be between teammates where one just announced it's going to be running NASCAR, won't be running the Indy 500. And then there's the other one that's trying to qualify for the Indianapolis 500, but the way things were in testing, that's a huge insurmountable task they got in store. And all it has, the first race on the radio, seems like even Rick Ware was not happy with his son, the way he was driving his teammate, James Davison, who brings some money. And I'd imagine if you give him good equipment, James Davison will probably be better of the two. And there's no disputing that. Because look what James Davison did with Sebastian Bourdais' coin car in 2017. He was getting a knack of it. And then obviously got collected in that big wreck. But for my concern about Cody, and that's the thing we kind of talked about, Richard, a bit. That kind of attitude, that kind of behavior, the way he was driving and the way his teammate, even his father, were mad at him, except to tell him to knock it off and everything. You got to think that it's either he's like, he focused so much on the open wheels in Indianapolis, trying to get accommodated to where jumping into a stock car, the transition is very, very weird and bizarre, or just the way he's been perceived that may concern the IndyCar drivers. And the last thing I'd imagine you want to see is a guy like Montoya, Bourdais, or Will Power get affected by Ware and and sometimes his questionable driving and reputation to where it's not going to bode well. And as far as the comments that James told Cody, was it out of line? Yes, it was heat of the moment, for sure. But they got to get it together, both of them do, because one will either go or they just got to have to get used to being teammates, because one way or the other, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. And if I were Cody, I'd just focus on you and see what happens in the month of May, because I still think that's an insurmountable task for him to make it at this point.
Yeah, it is. Oh, go ahead,
Richard. If the IndyCar guys are worried about Cody Ware's sort of questionable driving habits, has anybody ever seen what Santino Ferrucci did when he was in GP2? I think they'll be okay with Cody Ware. They'll put him in his place pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, that's why you have those. That's why I mentioned those guys' names. I mean, I mentioned Montoya in discussion because sometimes it's like, okay,
they'll take it.
IndyCar aggressiveness.
Will Power will be like, "Hey, Cody, come behind the holders for a minute," and they'll sort him out. They won't have to worry about him during the race.
I think for the way
he makes the race.
Test, yeah, for sure. I think how he did in testing was not bad. I just still ponder that big concern. Hopefully, we don't have to worry about that, whether he makes it or not. But if he makes it, then I hope it doesn't end up in that situation where this could become such a burden. Because I want him to be good.
I would imagine that young Cody Ware, despite his youth, is smart enough to realize that you can't drive an IndyCar at 230 miles an hour in the same fashion that you drive a stock car at Martinsville.
Or a sports car as well, because that's kind of also his main foray as well, outside of NASCAR, is doing the Age of Le Mans and the Rolex 24.
Right, and he's performed decently in those classes there. So yeah, but again, you get a short track racing, it's a totally different beast, and you can do that bumping and banging and let the temper get the best of you, and so I would imagine he's smart enough to realize that sort of behavior isn't going to fly at Indianapolis. In fact, it could get somebody killed, and I imagine that he's smart enough to realize that. That's, again, like you say, assuming he makes the field. He's when people talk about who's going to get bumped, he's pretty much the first name to come up. You're talking with a guy with 0 IndyCar races under his belt. Young guy, very few NASCAR races under his belt. I think he's only got 10 Cup starts.
Oh no, he's got plenty. He's been driving Cups since 2017.
But on a part-time basis, though, right?
Pretty much ended up being part-time. I know he's pretty much full-time this season in Cup, albeit he switched points to Xfinity. He hasn't driven hardly any Xfinity to get the points, which I still question that motive by the team as to why you'd put him in Xfinity if he's not even running it still. It's like, if you're going to run the whole Cup year, except for the 600 at the moment, you might as well go for the points and see where it goes. Don't just drop 3 to 4 races and go do Xfinity, collect Xfinity points only not to run Xfinity after you make the declaration. It's just the littlest things. But no, I totally understand. But it's just kind of is astonishing that those two have those moments, because apparently there's some history between those two. I couldn't really fully tell you that, but the way they were acting towards one another, to the point that Rick Ware had to put his foot down and tell his son to get it together, is rather concerning in some elements. It's like, if there is animosity between those two drivers, then that's on them. We can't control it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, see, I've met Davison a couple of times and spoken with him. He doesn't really come off as a hothead. You know what I mean? And this is even in his days running the SRO sports cars and whatnot, that he's ran a lot of races in that discipline. So Cody must really just get under his skin and rub him the wrong way to get that kind of reaction out of Davison. Davison is, generally speaking, a pretty level-headed guy.
Yeah, it doesn't help that there were contact between them multiple times, not just the Sunday portion, but the little bit that we ran on Saturday night. In fact, that was the incident before the torrential downpour came in and postponed the race much later in the Sunday.
Right.
And then they had a couple more incidents. It's like, good grief. It's like, it's just how things fall into place. Like, it's like the way it boils down to is like, it's like we're a week removed that James said he's going to be focusing on NASCAR entirely this year. And then this thing happens. Like, you gotta be careful. You gotta think about these little things. Like, oh, I wonder how he feels now about it. But hopefully at Richmond, cooler heads prevail and they move on from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Richard, you're being quiet over there. So, what are your thoughts coming out of Martinsville here? Before we move forward in our discussion,
it was your classic, short track race, wasn't it? I must admit, when I did the bits of the race I did, I found the sort of little handbags, if you like, between Davis and Ware, quite funny. It's your typical short track that, you look at the guys and you imagine they've just had the big one at Daytona and they've almost killed each other, the way they're reacting. It's like, dude, you were probably going at about 80 miles an hour when you turned him. It's not exactly edge of the seat stuff, is it? It's all a little bit pathetic, really, especially for teammates running for 25th and 26th or whatever it was. Yeah, that was a little bit silly, but I thought the comments that were made earlier about Martin Truex is quite interesting. I don't think anybody would put Truex in the top 2 or 3 fastest outright guys in NASCAR. If you want somebody to set a quick lap, he's not the guy that you'd look to wring the maximum out of a car. But he certainly has the ability to execute well and get the job done and do what he needs to bring the car home. And, he's there at the end of the race more often than not. Very rarely do you see him start the race well and drop back. He's typically the guy that'll be running 7th or 8th at the end of stage 1 and, slowly pick it up throughout the race. And that's the mentality he's got. That's the mentality that the team's got. And I think they're doing a really good job there. with good machinery and a good team behind them, they'll be a challenger come the end of the season for the championship, no doubt. But Martinsville, unfortunately, it was meant to be under the lights, obviously, but it wasn't. It got pushed back to Sunday afternoon. I really don't think that the race is under threat anymore. I mean, the investment to make that a night race, the investment to put those lights in and be running into the millions of dollars. So I don't think Martinsville would have been naive enough to turn around and invest that sort of money without some sort of long-term contract there from NASCAR. But it's short track racing, bit of bumping and banging, and it is what it is. And on to Richmond for what's that? It's a 1 mile oval, isn't it? It's sort of a cross between a short track and
3/4 mile.
Yeah, I was gonna say
3/4 mile. Okay.
It's not quite a mile. But the interesting thing about Martinsville there is when we talk about how it was considered to be on the chopping block not that many years ago, until it was purchased from its original owners by with SMI. But there was a movement towards all these cookie cutter tracks. When we're building all these 1.5 miles oval, there was a movement towards all these tracks being the same. Now it seems like the thought process is variety. Now we feel like the series needs. In the 90s, it was fine if every track we add was a 1.5 mile copy of Charlotte. And that seemed to really work well for a while, but now it's variety is the spice of life. Look at the road courses that we've added, and we put the Roval in at Charlotte, and we're running the Indianapolis road course, and so we're throwing dirt on Bristol. These are all adding variety to that cookie cutter mentality that we had in the 90s that was successful, but now I think that whole philosophy keeps Martinsville relatively safe because it is a very unique track.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, is it going to be a track that produces the most entertaining racing of the season? Probably not. But if you want to have a definitive championship, then half mile tracks are a staple of what is stock car racing fundamentally, isn't it? I mean, a lot of these guys who are growing up midget racing on like quarter mile tracks, like you've got at Charlotte on the front stretch that goes on the pit road and they, loops around onto the start finish line.
Yeah, a little bandolero track. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, those short track races are, all the guys that are racing in the Cup Series will have grown up on those. So I think you've got to have it. And it does add something to it. It's. I remember listening to people trying to sort of justify and explain the differences between all the 1.5 mile tracks on the calendar and how each one has its own unique characteristics. And it's like, geez, I mean, it's like splitting hairs, really, isn't it? And I know they're right in what they were saying fundamentally, but it's still, they all look the same to not a fan, should we say? Somebody who just flicks it on and turns it on and watches it on TV goes, oh, look, there's a cup car going around 1.5 mile track. Great. It all looks the same. But now, this year, you're not going to have that. You're going to have, oh, look, there's a NASCAR going around a road course. Oh, that's interesting. Let's watch that. It creates that variety, as you say. And, Martinsville, again, is something a little bit different. And I think it's important to have.
I agree. So we're on to Richmond, like we said. So you guys care to make a prediction for the Richmond race?
I couldn't go wrong with Penske again. I think we'll see. The difference is the daytime surface, but I still feel like Brad Keselowski is probably going to be the guy to beat. I will keep an eye on how Austin Dillon does because, if I recall, he had a real strong car last time around. So those will be my two people to keep an eye on. But Keselowski, I think he'll bounce back from a disappointing Martinsville result.
All right.
I'm going to go with
go ahead, Richard.
Kyle Busch.
Yep, Kyle's overdue for a win. I'm gonna say Truex is gonna be the first guy to win 3 races this year, and Truex will win there. So, so IndyCar, we're getting ready to start the season. We're going down to the Barber Motorsports Park outside of Birmingham, Alabama, one of the most beautiful race courses in the country. The United States has a lot of very beautiful road courses. Barber is certainly one of those. If you've never been down there, it's a beautiful place to watch the race. They've got a fantastic museum down there, right out there on the grounds that has a lot of vintage motorcycles and a lot of vintage race cars. Barber was
is Barber the one with all the sculptures in the infield as well, of the spiders and stuff?
Got the
Barber.
Got the giant spiders, and then it's got
that's it. Yeah.
It's got
Don't listen to War of the Worlds while you're there.
yeah.
They have interesting stuff there, that's for sure. I know there's something around it's very very grotesque, intriguing, and also just makes it stand out for sure. And I noticed that museum is good grief, you'll lose about an hour or two, maybe more, depending on time availability by looking at those cars.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Barber was initially put together as a course for motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
It was a motorcycle racetrack, and then they added in a sports car race, I believe, and then they tried to court the IndyCar series, and they weren't sure if they would do. They weren't sure if IndyCar would play in the Alabama market. So they did the spring training test at Barber one year, and the drivers universally liked the circuit, and so then the following year they went ahead and added it to the schedule, and it brings out a great crowd. Despite being smack dab in the middle of NASCAR country, you've got a lot of people that come out to watch the Indy cars, and then the race has been there for 10 years now. You've got a fan base down there in Alabama of very, very knowledgeable IndyCar fans who have grown to love the race and follow the whole series. And so it's it's one of those success stories when whenever you add a new event, you never know if it's going to be a keeper or if it's going to be a one and done like the one they tried to do down in New Orleans. Alabama has become.
We don't talk about it. New Orleans, especially Dale Corn Racing. That was brutal.
Yeah, we don't talk about NOLA. The first rule about NOLA is there is no NOLA. So, and that was, oddly though, it's not the record for the slowest race ever. Despite
another one where it was a monsoon came through or something.
That race where basically 95% of the race was cautions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally.
They would get, and it was, the rain was awful. And if you got off course, it was like you're just going into the river. There was so much water on the grass. Yeah, that was pretty awful there down there in NOLA. They really, and again, NOLA is a little club track, right? And these guys had such high hopes. They wanted to become the Long Beach Grand Prix of the South, and they failed miserably. They didn't have the infrastructure. They found out the track had very poor to zero drainage whatsoever. So NOLA didn't quite survive beyond that first year, although James Hinchcliffe won that one. And speaking of Hinchcliffe, he's back full-time with Andretti. He'll be making his debut as a full-time Andretti driver once again at Barber. Other people making their debut will be Scott McLaughlin, Jimmy Johnson, Romain Grosjean. All these guys are very excited. And, Jimmy's been dominating a lot of the talk from the media. Obviously, his name is very well known in racing circles. He draws a lot of eyes, and the opinions are split. I mean, there are some of your IndyCar fans that feel he's an old washed up NASCAR driver. But the guy that would disagree with you probably the most right there is in fact his team owner, Mr. Chip Ganassi, who had some very glowing things to say about the effort Jimmy is putting in and his work ethic and his ability to adapt. So I'm really kind of interested to see how Jimmy, I don't think he's going to come out and win the season opener. He's not going to, do like a Nigel Mansell. But I think Jimmy's going to be fun to watch as he learns and grows. And I think obviously McLaughlin is also going to be very fun to watch.
Yeah. For the case of Jimmy Johnson, I think I mentioned it already. And my mindset is if he's on par with Marcus Ericsson, then there's something there that over time that Johnson will do good. Do I expect him to sneak a win like Ganassi said? No, not this season. Who knows? There's going to be a lot of circumstances for that to happen. Do I see him getting at least one podium? It's doable. But we just got to have to see how he does at Barber and at St. Pete. If he does extraordinarily well, or like I said, on par with Ericsson, then maybe he'll adapt quite well. Then after that, it'll be basically mostly Kanaan, except for the Grand Prix of Indy for a while. Because
Right,
the Texas doubleheader in the 500.
Yep. So
And as
what do
far
you
as
got?
McLaughlin, before real quick,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious. I feel like short St. Pete didn't really go too well, but I think now that he's done more testing and now we have a lot more testing, I feel like he maybe have some promise. He may have a promising chance that he could win as a rookie. I do feel like he's got a Penske car. I'm adamant. I'm confident that he'll adapt quite well. I'll be surprised if he's not in the top 10 in points by the end of the month of May. If he's not in that top 10 by the end of the month of May, then maybe I'd be hitting the panic button quite a bit. But I really don't see that happening. I think he'll adapt quite well.
Well, I think he will adapt quite well, but for me, just historically, whenever Penske's expanded to 4 cars, the spread of the wealth hasn't been there. If you recall, when they first added Pagano as a 4th wheel there, he had a pretty miserable first season with Penske, by Penske standards. He didn't have a Dale Coyne miserable season, but it certainly wasn't the debut season we expected out of Pagano moving over to Penske. But then, 1 year later, boom, he wins the championship. But again, they scale back to 3 cars at that point in time. So now they're expanding to 4 again. So
and with Ganassi, there's some parallels with expansions.
Exactly. I think the last guy with 4 cars and all 4 cars got a win was Andretti, and it was back in like 2004 when all 4 of his team cars got a win.
It would be Franchitti, Weldon, Kanaan, and Herta.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that they all won a race in 2004. But I don't think that the feat of having all 4 of your team cars win a race has been repeated.
Yeah, it is tough, especially depends who they have in that core lineup. And that's the thing, Ganassi's going to be tough. I mean, outside of last year when Road Sequence won Road America, it's been mostly just Dixon.
Right.
They have the more concern of trying to go to 14. Penske, we've seen them do it with 2, 3. Question is, can he get it with 4? And if they do that with McLaughlin, I think they've learned a lot, and also just to showcase that McLaughlin's still in trying to reach his peak as a racing driver. Sure, he did everything that he had to do to accomplish everything at supercars. Now he's going to a different world, but I imagine hoping to do the same thing and also dabble on those ovals because we talked about it. He's the only full-time legitimate rookie. Because Grosjean and Johnson are only running the road to street courses with Grosjean, big question mark of Gateway. And now even Johnson hasn't ruled out about doing the 500 in the future.
Yeah, I guess his wife has maybe changed her mind is what they're saying. Maybe she has some confidence in that aero screen. But she said, yeah, he said he might be. I think the lure of it is strong, especially for, a racer like Jimmy Johnson, to be there and around, and he was present when the other guys were testing in Indianapolis. I think the lure of it is going to be too strong for him to stay away from it forever, and at least put that on his resume that he's competed in the Indianapolis 500 before he calls it a career.
Yeah, he'll have that over Gordon, that's for sure, and have that 500 start.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Richard, let's talk about Grosjean a little bit because he's the one that is more often than not being kind of left out of the rookie conversation here, being in the fact that he's not with a Ganassi or a Penske like these other cats are. No. But the Coyne team, is a proven race winning team. They have won races. Yep. They've won races with Stephen Wilson. They won races with Bourdais.
Yep.
They've won races with
Justin Wilson.
What did I say?
Stephen Wilson.
No, Justin Wilson. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And not the chef, Justin Wilson, the race car driver. And they've won races with Mike Conway. So, and they perform well with Santino, very recently. So, What do you think? I mean, is Grosjean? We know he's talented, right? He's got a bit of a bad rap in Formula One as crashing people out, but then again, he's more often than not run at the back of the grid in F1.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, I think that reputation has gone a little bit. I think, yeah, he did have it in the start of the career. Obviously, we all remember back to Spa, a few years ago when he like catapulted over the back of 4 or 5 cars and almost decapitated a couple of drivers. But he's come a long way from those days, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. Typically when guys come over from Formula One into IndyCar that are the big names that have had some experience, it's towards the end of the career. I'm looking at Barrichello as probably one of the most successful that's made the move. Whereas Grosjean he's 32, 33 maybe. So he's like middle stroke peak of his career. He's got plenty left in the tank there. And he's got more of a reputation than maybe an Ericsson had in terms of his performance. And it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. It really will. I genuinely hope that he puts in some really, really strong performances, because there's something about Grosjean that I think he's a little bit unlucky with the Haas situation. Given the financial situation, the political situation within the team, I don't think he really had any choice. Or they had, he was always going to lose that seat, not on performance, purely on, the politics of the situation. So it'd be interesting to see what he's got left in him, especially after, the accident that cut short his final season by a couple of races there that we all remember in Bahrain. Is that in the back of his mind? And it must be. I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah, and I want to say that even when he was testing, he was still experiencing some pain in those in his hands that were badly burned. Yeah, so he's still fighting through the injury some.
Yeah, there was a video that I saw on one of the social media channels today, of him, in the HPD, is it the Honda Performance Group, their simulator, and he was driving the simulator there without gloves on, and you can see there's lots of scarring, unfortunately, still on the back of his left hand, and it's not nice. But I think what you find is that when these guys get, for want of a better word, in the zone, they just forget about that sort of stuff. They're there, they're focused, their attention's locked in. These sort of things really don't become an issue. And the way they design these monocoques these days, they can easily create a channel maybe so that his back of his hand doesn't knock the side of the car when he's steering, because that can happen. I've seen drivers, they'll, especially at some circuits like Monaco, they go full lock and their hand will catch the side of the car, which can be off-putting, to say the least, for a guy without serious burns on the back of his hands. So, he'll be, I think he'll do well. I really, really hope he does. And, just because I think there's something still there in him, I don't think it's difficult to say you don't think he deserves not to be in Formula One, because at the end of the day, he's not in Formula One, so it doesn't matter whether he deserves it or not. But I think his performances of the last few years has been because of the car rather than in spite of the car. The Haas last year. You've got to remember back the Haas 2 or 3 years ago when they could have almost got a podium in the opening race if they'd learned how to put the wheels on properly. Both Grosjean and Magnussen retired within 2 or 3 laps of each other. So, I think the guy will do well, and I hope he does.
Yeah, I think the big question mark when it comes to Grosjean is not him as the driver, but it's the engineering department there at Coin. They've they had some top engineers in there for a while with Bourdais, you know, between they had Mike Cannon in there and Luis, who was the other guy, the Newman Haas guy they had in there?
Sampson was also part of that Bourdais Cannon group.
Right.
Craig
Hampson. Craig Hampson.
Yeah.
Craig Hampson, he's out McLaren, isn't he?
He's yep. And Mike Cannon is engineering Scott Dixon's car, which we saw to a championship last year. So the guys that have at Coin are, and I don't know their names off the top of my head, but they both worked under Cannon and Hampson, so they've learned from those guys, but they're not at that level yet. You know, so
that's where Bourdais will bring another dynamic. You know,
well, Bourdais is driving for AJ Foyt.
Sorry, Grosjean.
Okay,
right nationality, wrong driver. Sorry. You know, that's where Grosjean will bring an extra dynamic. I think the level that he's used to working at, and there's no disrespect to the IndyCar guys, will be on another level. You know, he will demand more and expect more from his engineers and the guys around him to deliver. And I think that as an individual driver, you know, especially, you know, as I said earlier, you know, somebody in Grosjean's position, you've got to look at it. Why is he doing this? You know, he's not like a Marcus Ericsson, for example, who, you know, lost his seat at a relatively young age in Formula One and, you know, wanted to continue, to grow his career. And he's not like a Barrichello who's probably, you know, winding down his career. You know, Grosjean, as I say, is in this position where he's doing this for a reason. He's not doing this as a jolly, you know, or, you know, to try and keep his name in the frame. He's doing this because he wants to do it and because he wants to win and he wants to be competitive. And I think that drive that he will bring to the team will negate any of the shortcomings that they have from an engineering department, for sure.
Very interesting perspective, Richard. Very interesting. So now, Louise, let's talk about Alexander Rossi. I mean, here's a guy who's been kind of up and down. I mean, there are days when he's absolutely unbeatable, and then there are days when he beats himself on the track. But he's been a favorite for the championship the last couple of years. But yet he's not been able to put it all together. And this, I believe he made some comments recently that anything less than winning the championship for this year for him would be unacceptable. Do you feel like the Andretti team itself has been up and down? If you recall when we did in 2015, when we first added the aero kits, the Andretti team seemed to be the one that even though they did all the testing for the Honda kit, they seemed to be the ones that were farthest behind on the track. And, you know, rather than because they spent all their off-season developing the aero kit, not really working on race strategy and those sort of things. So then they came back a little bit, but overall they really haven't put up a great challenge to the Penskes and Ganassis since 2012 when Hunter Ray won the championship.
That was the last time they won the championship. Andretti in 2012 with Ryan Hunter-Reay.
So they've been in the nine long years.
Yeah, they've been in the mix with Rossi. I recall 2018, he was right up there with Newgarden and Dixon. I see Will Power and even Ryan Hunter-Reay had a reach of a shot of the championship. Yeah, he won Sonoma, but it's just bad luck and just a lot of circumstances have been. Look no further than that finale in 2018 in Sonoma that NBC infamously missed the bit that ultimately decided champion were plotted into the back of Marco Andretti. That cost him any shot of winning that championship away from Dixon. And last year with Rossi, he had pretty much, statistically speaking, his worst season of his young career by far. Albeit the second half of the year, he finally got it together and turned it around. Just St. Pete put him back where they were at the start. It was just rough season. They barely hung on to a top 10 championship points position. And now, go on.
Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a thing that, and I've mentioned this on the show before, you know, many times. You know, the top teams in any discipline, in any motor racing series, you know, you look at Mercedes, Red Bull in Formula One, you look at Gibbs, Hendrick, Penske to a certain extent in NASCAR. Ganassi and Penske in IndyCar. It's all about preparation at that level or that end of the grid. To put it bluntly, you have, and I've used this analogy before, if there's 10 things that you need to do right to win a race, those top teams that I've just mentioned will get 7 or 8 of those things right every week. And it can be simple things on preparation, but they'll get them spot on every week. And it means they've got less things that they have to get right to win a race. And I just feel that maybe with the Andretti team, that's maybe where they're lacking a little bit, is the preparation. There's something not quite clicking with them. They make silly mistakes. They make mistakes that maybe some of the other teams wouldn't make. And it's just those are the things that you got to get right, because Rossi's as good a driver as anybody in the field, within a tenth or two. So there's no reason why he can't be challenging for wins every weekend. But some weekends he's just last year and the year before he's just been out to sea, and nowhere near where he needs to be. And it's just executing and getting those little things right when you need to get it right.
Yeah, and IndyCar season is too short to not come out of the box strong. There's no playing catch up. I mean,
Will Power said he needs to get that strong start of the season. Otherwise, he's going to have the same problems where he flourishes. And I imagine Rossi as well now. Even Colton Herta, they got to start strong right out of the gate.
If you look at what Dixon last year won the first 3.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a championship over.
He won the first 3, then he finished second in Indianapolis. So it was,
he won one more time after that. So
right, yeah, but for the second half of the season, he was not quite as dominant as he was.
Do what he needs. Well, but again,
other people have caught up to him. Yeah, mm-hmm.
You look at what they need to do. This is a risky business. At the end of the day. So you look at your position that they are in, come halfway through the season, they've won 4 races or whatever, and come second at Indy, which is, double points finish. The guy that won wouldn't be a championship threat. So again, they're making, gains in those races. So you plan correctly. You say, okay, where do we need to finish every race from here to the end of the season to win a championship? We need to finish top 5. Okay, well, what are we going to do to guarantee that, to execute that plan with the least number of variables? And you could argue that's not the right way to race. You should be pushing all the time to try and win every race, and maybe you should, but sorry guys, that's just the way it is. You've got a championship to win at the end of the day, and you do what you can do and you do what you need to do to make that happen. And what Ganassi did last year, and it's also that, last year as well, we talk about, the guys at Coin, for example, having an engineering restructure. The guys at Ganassi had an engineering restructure as well last year, and they didn't skip a beat. If anything, it made them stronger. So,
well, I mean, the guy that brought in was Mike Cannon, who's one of the best in the business. So
exactly.
So I mean, so the restructuring was an upgrade. Just saying.
Yes.
But we were talking about Penske and Ganassi expanding 2 4 cars. At the same time, we have Andretti decreasing from 5 cars to 4 cars. So I kind of wonder if that will help them, because Andretti's been, running the larger and the largest team for decades. Since they came on the scene in 2003 with 4 teams, and they've been running 5 the last couple of years. So maybe scaling back to 4 will allow them to put a little more focus on each of the 4 cars they have there. Cause you've got, Rossi obviously can be very strong. Hunter Ray's still got a lot left in the tank. Hinchcliffe has something to prove. And then, of course, Colton Herta is the rising star. So you've got decent talent behind the wheel here, but you've only got the 4 guys rather than the 5th one to work on. So I wonder if that will play to their advantage, where maybe expanding will play to the disadvantage of the Penskes and Ganassis.
Time will tell with that. And don't forget, even last year they had the Harding entry. So theoretically speaking, there were 6 of them. Just the Harding Steinbrenner entity is gone. It's now pretty much Colton and the main Andretti K, but of course the 98 is only going to be part-time with Marco, and question marks on Sage Karam if he'll run it at any point. But other than that, I think it'll help them go into 4 cars because they've just focused on those 4 guys. They can't afford any weaknesses because remember, Colton's going to a car that just has not had the best of results in a long while, that 26 car. So we're curious to see how he does in that car. That's quite frankly, some people's like the weakest Andretti car of the whole bunch. The 29 with Hinchcliffe.
Well, we'll
see.
How's that the weakest car of the whole bunch when Marco was there for years? Marco's
the past couple years.
I want to say that probably Veach was better than Marco on a lot of occasions, but
Veach could not find consistency enough. That's what I'm getting my point across compared to the 27 and the 28.
Well, I mean, as good as Herta has been, he's not been wildly consistent.
That is true. He was better out of last year compared to the year before where he got all the last place finishes. So this would be key for him to not just get even more stronger finishes, because I think how he got third is probably because he was there at the right place, the right side, collected the most points necessary, where the other ones, the usual strong ones, on a race-by-race basis, had a lot of woes. And I look at Penske, and I definitely look at Simon Pagenaud, who basically, as Penske were getting it together in the second half, Pagenaud was MIA in the second half after the win at Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you just got to really just say, when it comes to winning championships, Ganassi does it better than anybody.
That is true.
Because
primarily Dixon, but still.
Well, Dixon, plus, coupled with Franchitti. Franchitti won 3 with them.
Mm-hmm. Talking about more or less since Franchitti had to retire.
Right, yeah. Well, it's been, Dixon was the heir apparent to the throne. He's now the king of Ganassi. But championship-wise, I mean, if you look at Will Power could have won 3 or 4 championships instead of just the one, but he lost them all to Ganassi. Well, he lost the one to Hunter Ray. And Pagenaud probably could have won another one there, but he lost that one to his own teammate. But yeah, when it comes to championship planning, preparation, the whole season planning, I think nobody does it better than Ganassi, and Dixon once again is going to be the guy to beat.
So a quick question for you guys. I'd be interested to get your opinion on this. If Will Power doesn't win the championship this year, or at least contend strongly, where do you think that leaves him? Especially if somebody like McLaughlin comes in and competes and puts it to him, for want of a better word.
Well, that is an interesting point.
I think he might still be around, because who else could jump into Penske, or who does Penske want to go for? Because I think he can't get Rossi because he's in a multi-year deal, I think.
Yeah.
So he was the main guy he wanted to get when he was in a contract season before he decided to stay with Andretti.
Yeah, contracts aren't worth the paper they're written on. You know that.
Well, I mean, we've seen, both Montoya and Castro Neves put out to pasture at Penske. So, Will Power's got
Rogers, the captain's pretty brutal when he wants to be.
Yeah. So Will can't assume that
Tom Sneba after winning no races but the championship.
Yeah. Will can't sit on the laurel of having, won the most IndyCar races of any Penske driver in history, and winning a 500 in a championship. That only goes so far, just like, Hunter Ray is another guy that you got to kind of figures on the back end of his career as well. So yeah, I mean, and there's always the possibility, because, when they expanded to 4 cars to get Pagenaud on the team, they quickly, the next year dropped back to 3 and sent Montoya to sports cars. It could very well be that if Will doesn't perform this year, he's they go back to 3 cars and he finds himself as the Indy only entrant or whatnot. So I think.
And Will, I mean, Pagenaud hasn't exactly been standout.
It could.
You look at the Penske lineup, and it's strong, but it's certainly been. It hasn't been consistent the last couple of years. And you could quite easily see if they don't win races on a regular basis, one or two of them being out at the end of the season.
Oh, sure, yeah, both those guys. But I think Simon and Will, neither one is remarkably safe. You know, they were thinking Pagenaud was on his way out before he won Indy in 19. You know, people thought Will was on his way out before he won Indy. You know, winning Indy does a lot for Roger. He does like that. That's a good way. that is a good way to keep your job.
It's amazing how that works, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think both those guys' careers, you know, were lengthened by Indy 500 win for sure. But yeah, Will used to be good for 4 or 5, maybe 6 race wins a year. You know, now he's good for 1 or 2. You know,
exactly.
But
you got to slow them down in qualifying, but he's just gonna have to back it up now with these race wins.
Exactly. Yeah. But even if you look at the IndyCar field overall, you've got a lot of guys. There are a lot of guys in there over 40. You know, Dixon's 40 now, Hunter Ray's 40, Power's 40, Sato's 45. Funny. I was looking at
Johnson is 45, but he's a
rookie. Johnson, he's a rookie, yeah. But then you got these guys, the Indy 500 only guys, right? You know, Kanaan 46, Castroneves is 45, Montoya's 46. You know, there's a lot of seats will be open for young guys in the next couple of years. You know, I don't. But at the same time, it bodes well for the over 45 set. I was just looking at how many guys are over 45, you know, and
you got to think, this just dawned on me a little bit. You got to think, depending how Kyle Kirkwood does, how he factor in with the whole Andretti, and also brought up Penske, because who will they? You talked about Power and Pagenaud. We got to think about the same thing as Andretti, because depending on sponsorship money, additional sponsorship money, Kyle Kirkwood will also play a role as far as the future of Andretti Autosport.
Certainly, yeah, and Hunter Ray is only, as good as long as DHL wants to stay on. There was a question this year whether or not DHL was going to sign for another year, you know, and if you lose your sponsor that likes you, Michael doesn't hesitate to send you packing. I mean, ask Tony Kanaan after 7-Eleven dropped, or ask Hinchcliffe after GoDaddy dropped out, or the United Fiber Data. So you're only as good as what the sponsor thinks of you too. So, and as far as I know, Verizon is pretty happy with Will. I mean, even though they've dropped the series sponsorship, they've stayed on Will's car. So I don't.
And they're pretty in bed with the whole Penske organization, aren't they?
Certainly. And now that Penske runs the series, I think they're pretty safe there. But I think Verizon would be just as happy to put their name on Newgarden's car as they were Will Power. I honestly don't think that it makes a bit of a difference.
Exactly.
It's
publicity, isn't it? It's whatever gets the biggest bang for the buck. And I think, unfortunately, for Will Power, it's probably his Newgarden right now and for the foreseeable future. I mean, what is Joseph now? 28, 30?
Yeah, he's out. Yeah, I think he's right at 30.
So he's got another 10 years in it. He's got another 10, 12 years at the top of it. And no disrespect to Will Power, he just doesn't have that. And you look at Scott Dixon; he's got better with age. Will's struggling a little bit
compared to the way he was driving 5-6 years ago. Yeah, he is struggling compared to the Will Power who could go out and win almost any race anywhere.
And maybe he's created that, reputation. Maybe he was too good 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Now we look at him and we go, oh, you know what? He's not driving great. Well, he's maybe driving just as well, but maybe there's other good drivers out there now that weren't around 5 years ago. So maybe he's been, the playing field's a little bit more level. And
the competition is a little stiffer.
Yeah. So maybe he's created this sort of like expectation that we all have for him to go out and win 5 or 6 races a year. And you know what? Winning 1 or 2 is actually a good year now.
It certainly is.
Dixon had a freak year last year. He just clicked with them perfectly. But again, preparation.
Exactly. Preparation, like you say. Yeah. So let's go ahead and pick a winner for Barber. Christopher DeHardy, who's not with us tonight, asked me to go ahead and plug in Joseph Newgarden for his. But yeah,
Sure.
sure. I mean, Newgarden's won there 3 times. Why not? Why not one more?
I bet DeHardy's fun at the casino, isn't he? I bet he goes for the sticks all his money on Red 15 or whatever, doesn't he? You know, he.
All right. So what do you think,
boy.
Richard? Who do you like for Barber?
Barber. God, it could be anybody, couldn't it? You really don't know. Let's go McLaughlin. Let's really shake it up, McLaughlin. He goes there and wins the first race of the season.
Wins in his debut. That would be awesome to see.
Well, no, he did race St. Pete last year, didn't he?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah. Okay. You're right. You're right.
Start.
All right, and Louise,
You know,
what do you think?
debut. Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah.
I think Dixon finally doesn't finish second. I think he'll finally win one at Barber.
All right, and then what if I just go way out of the box and say that Takuma Sato wins? Because here's another guy who just
Not a bad.
He's won
choice.
that before,
Defending
hasn't he?
winner.
He's won there before.
He has won there before. Yep. But
The last one before the pandemic canceled last year's event.
right. Yes, he did.
Well, you know, we haven't mentioned at all on the IndyCar scene this. You know, throughout this whole discussion, is any of the McLaren guys?
yeah, and I think they've got a
Award.
very strong team this year. I think Award's going to contend for the championship.
Yeah,
He's going to be right up there. So
wouldn't surprise me if they don't nick a win or two here and there.
no, it wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, I think they've got they got last year solidly under their belt. They had a great year last year. You know, they didn't get a win, but I think McLaren's good for a couple of wins.
They learned a lot though under difficult circumstances.
They learned a lot, and I think Montoya is a threat to win the 500. I mean, here's a guy who has the ability to walk away from something for several years, come back and win it again. He's done that time and again. And oddly enough, if he happens to win, he will break Al Unser Sr.'s record of the longest span of time between first Indy win and last Indy win.
There you go.
Yep, because it'll be 21 years since his first win. And Al Unser is 17 years between his first win and his fourth win. So Montoya already has the record for the longest span between two of his own Indy wins.
What would Castro Neves be if he won?
Well, his last one was in 2009, right? So that
was his
09.
first.
His first win was in 2001.
Mm-hmm. So
he'd be 20 years as well.
Yeah,
he would.
He could break that record as well. Certainly, yeah. And if Buddy Lazier jumped in and won, he'd smash the record. So Buddy shows up every now and again, but I think he's finally done.
Yeah, he hasn't showed up since 16 or 17, so it's bit.
He hasn't showed up since they've been able to get 33 cars without ringing up his phone and say, "Buddy, we got a little money for you here. You want to come and be car number 33?" So, but yeah, Buddy hasn't been back since they've been able to fill the field. So, well, my gosh, we are out of time. So, but let's quickly put in a pick for the Formula One race, which is being held in Imola. And Louise, what are they calling that race? Since you practice pronouncing it, I don't want to rob you of the opportunity to say that on the air.
The Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, which is known as the race at Imola.
And who do you like for the win?
Let's go with Verstappen in this one. And I do feel like George Russell will get a top 10 at long last with Williams, which will likely be 10th.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's actually quite possible. Now, Richard?
I think there's a pretty good shout there by Luis. I'm going to go for Checo, just to make it. I think Red Bull will have learned from their mistakes, and they won't make the same ones again this year. And they'll get the job done. This week, and they'll get the job done. And Verstappen still won't win a race in Italy, and it'll be Checo, Sergio Perez, that gets over the line first this weekend.
Okay, yeah, that's a good pick. That would be interesting to see, because we've talked about how how Perez will do against Verstappen, with Verstappen as a solid team leader. I think the Red Bulls are going to be strong once again, but I feel like at the end of the day, it's going to be same old, and Lewis Hamilton adds another one to his massive list of wins So I don't know. It's really not going out on much of a limb to say that Lewis Hamilton will win a Formula One race, but I'll say it. So, but that'll be a race worth talking about next week because Imola, one of the classic circuits. I'm so glad it's back on the calendar. It was very entertaining last year. It'll be fun to watch it again this year. But that being said, we are out of time. So I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network and iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. And I want to thank you, Louise and Richard. And I want to thank you folks who listen to us. And until next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.